Hi Year 8, welcome back to Key Stage 3 Science. We're currently working on chemistry and we worked on chemistry last week too. This is lesson 5 and if you haven't yet watched lesson 4 please go back and make sure you have a look at that to recap what you know about atoms and their subatomic particles. Your title today is Atomic Discovery and I want you to think about the question that you can see appearing on your screens now. When were atoms discovered? So when did we first start thinking about atoms? When do you think that might have been? Have a guess if you need to. And there's a challenge question at the bottom of your screen that says, how are atoms used in nuclear bombs? Okay, pause the video and share your thoughts on your piece of paper or type up your ideas. Okay, how do you do? When were atoms discovered? I've got two dates up on the screen, 450 BC, which is a very long time ago, and the 1800s, which is still quite a long time ago. Big differences between those two numbers. So when were atoms discovered? The most correct answer would be around the 1800s. That's when we first actually discovered atoms and parts of atoms, like their subatomic particles. We'll learn about a few of those scientists today. But the concept of atoms, of matter being made up of small particles that we couldn't see, was first suggested in ancient Greece around 450 BC. So the idea has been around a long time, but the evidence, the proof that they existed didn't really come until the 1800s. The super challenge, well done if you've had a go at this. Have a look at the picture for some inspiration. There's a big mushroom cloud there. How are atoms used in nuclear bombs? Well, nuclear bombs are also called atomic bombs because it's the atoms inside of them that release the energy that is given out when a bomb explodes. Only nuclear bombs. And it's the atoms inside of the bomb, the nucleus inside of the atom, that is split by a subatomic particle. And when the nucleus is split, it gives out that huge burst of energy that we see in nuclear bomb explosions. But that happens many times over inside the bomb, which causes the big explosion. Okay, so our objective today is to be able to recall the scientists who are involved in studying atoms and really who's responsible for the model of an atom that we use today. So the job today is to be able to name key scientists. We always use their surnames, so some of the surnames are on the bottom of the screen here in our keywords: Rutherford, Thompson, Bohr, amongst others. So I want you to be able to name key scientists and link their discoveries to them personally. Rutherford, who's one of the scientists we're going to discuss today, and the ultimate best aim of today's lesson is to be able to explain the purpose of his experiment. Okay, what we're going to do here is we're going to draw a timeline of the discovery of atoms and what we've learnt about their subatomic particles and how they look. So we're going to show how they've gone from being this blue circle on the left to being what we know and think atoms look like today on the right hand side. So along this straight line we're going to add in dates and facts and discoveries and name the scientists that did each of those experiments. You might not have your book in front of you, but if you've got a piece of paper, or as I said earlier, maybe you're using a PowerPoint or a Word document, you can write or type this information up. So if you are using paper, grab a straight line, so hopefully a ruler, and get your timeline ready for the information on the next few slides. Right, start your timeline with these two gentlemen pictured in the bottom left of your screen, Leucippus and Democritus. So they were two Greek philosophers. They coined the word atom, or atomos, which meant uncuttable in ancient Greek. So they came up with the idea that atoms were round, hard, and couldn't be broken into smaller pieces. And so they're indivisible particles. They can't be broken down any smaller than they were. They believed that atoms made up all different substances, and some substances were made up of unique atoms that weren't found in other materials. Okay, next on your timeline is John Dalton. John Dalton was around from 1803 to 1805. He agreed with the Greek philosophers in many cases, so he agreed that atoms were indestructible, unchangeable. He thought they were round, spherical objects, much like the Greeks did. But John Dalton theorized that atoms and elements were the same thing, that elements were just different types of atoms. He still agreed that they couldn't be broken down into smaller parts, but he then added that different atoms could combine to form compounds, which we now know is true. Okay, our next scientist was J.J. Thompson. He was a physicist. He discovered the electron, so he discovered the first subatomic particle in 1897. He worked around his ideas a little bit and then came up with the idea that an atom looks a bit like a plum pudding. Now, we don't really have plum pudding nowadays, and it wasn't really made of plums, it was made of raisins. So the most similar thing I could think of was Christmas cake, pictured here on the right. So he believed that's what atoms looked like on the inside, that they had a cakey substance which has a positive charge, and within the cakey substance was a scattering of raisins or fruit, and each of those had a negative charge. So he was the first person to suggest that there was something inside of atoms, smaller pieces like electrons. So he called his model the plum pudding model, and he suggested that in 1904. Okay, our next scientist is Ernest Rutherford. He came along in 1911, so only a few years after Thompson suggested the plum pudding model. Rutherford actually was once a student of Thompson, so he learned from the best. He did an experiment where he completely changed what we believe about atoms to be true. So he fired some small particles at a sheet of gold, and he noticed that most of these particles went straight through the sheet of gold, and that suggested that there must be a lot of empty space in atoms. They must be mostly made of nothing, and that's why they could the particles could go straight through them. So his experiment kind of blew apart the idea that atoms were like cakes and made of hard substances. His experiment suggested that actually, in fact, most of an atom is empty space. Okay, so after all of that, Rutherford came up with the model that we use today. So today's model of an atom is Rutherford's model of an atom. You can see that most of the mass of the atom is concentrated in the middle, and that there's lots of empty space in between those electron shells where particles in his gold-foiled experiment could shoot straight through without hitting anything. So the model of an atom we use today is Rutherford's model. Okay, and lastly we have James Chadwick. James Chadwick was also another local person. He did his work in Manchester, and in his later life he moved to Liverpool. James Chadwick discovered the neutron in 1932. He actually worked for Rutherford for a while. He was his student, and after World War I he went and worked for Rutherford and was involved with discovering the neutron. At this point, I'd like you to just take a moment and reflect on some of the things that you've written, the names of the scientists and what they discovered, and particularly think about the time that they lived in and the lack of technology a lot of them would have had to do their experiments. I want you to write a short paragraph discussing some of these questions I've got on the board, so something where you can group together your own ideas and put them together in a logical paragraph or sentence. How have our ideas about atoms changed over time? Can you sum that up, what we've learned from these different scientists? And who, in your opinion, was the most innovative scientist? Which of the three scientists, Thompson, Dalton or Rutherford, do you think was the most innovative, the most creative and unique? And the challenge at the bottom, it says, describe the nature of scientific discovery. Why do we still call it the theory of evolution? So I'd like you to have a think about how we discover new scientific ideas and how they build on one idea from the other. Okay, so far today we should have gone through, or you should have notes on the key scientists involved in the discovery of atoms and their structure and their subatomic particles. You should be able to name some scientists and what they individually discovered, and explain the purpose or results of Rutherford's experiment. Hopefully you've done that by drawing a timeline and writing a short paragraph to sum up what each of the scientists did and what we learnt from their experiments. As always, head on over to Educate and complete the Educate quiz, and make sure that you email your work to Cowley Science Department or submit it via Microsoft Teams. Okay, thank you. Bye.